So, Ed, how did this funding extension come together?
Came together pretty quickly, Elaine. Now that the tax bill is on its way to the White House for President Trump's signature, Congress turned to that one last big piece of unfinished business and agreed to keep the government open through January 19th. That is the date now at which all of the debate over the unfinished business of 2017 will probably fall on. And the hope is that by then there is an agreement on how much more money exactly the federal government should spend over the course of the next fiscal year, plus possibly resolution to a host of other complex issues. How much money Florida, Texas, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and California should get after hurricanes and wildfires, and whether or not that's the moment at which Congress finally enacts a permanent solution to the fate of dreamers, those young immigrants who are going to need new protections by March 5th or begin risk of deportation. They couldn't get it done here in the closing days of December before the Christmas holiday because the tax debate, frankly, took longer than anticipated. But now they believe by January 19th an agreement can come together.
Well, what does yet another funding fight do to other items on the Republican agenda for the new year?
It pushes everything now essentially closer to Valentine's Day because you're going to see Congress come back on January 3rd. They're going to have to debate this. They're going to have to sort out the federal spying authority you mentioned. The Senate is going to have to put a final bill together on the disaster funding that probably has to get reconsidered by the House. And then at some point, probably by the end of the month, when the president delivers his State of the Union, we'll have a better sense of what exactly Republicans want to do next. They've been debating this now in the wake of the big win on taxes. There are some who think there should be a new aggressive push to revamp Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Others say no, focus on things like funding for infrastructure projects across the country. That's a good chance to work with Democrats in an election year and in a now more closely divided Senate where bipartisan cooperation is going to be critical to getting anything done because, of course, Doug Jones, the new senator from Alabama, who is a Democrat, arrives on January 3rd.
And Ed, I know you have new reporting on a confrontation between Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus over protections for dreamers. What's the state of that effort?
Yeah, so remember, all fall, Democrats have been saying they were going to use this vote tonight to force Congress to finally come up with a solution for dreamers. Well, it didn't materialize because you have House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans still working on some kind of an agreement, but they just can't get final resolution on how you marry changes and how those dreamers are protected with some changes in security enforcement, whether that's more money for the border or more money for the Border Patrol to go after undocumented immigrants across the country, or changes in exactly how many people a new citizen could bring with them from their home country. So members of the Hispanic Caucus, who have been pushing hardest for these changes, walked from the House over to the Senate, into the offices of Chuck Schumer, and demanded a meeting. They gave a bit of a heads up saying they were on their way, and over the course of about an hour, it was a relatively cordial exchange in the end, but had a few moments of anger, where Luis Gutierrez, the Chicago area congressman, probably the most outspoken Democrat on immigration issues, turned to Chuck Schumer and said, "You guys are not holding up your end of the bargain here. Democrats in the Senate not fighting as aggressively as we are in the House. You're throwing them under the bus," Gutierrez said to Schumer.
Wow.
That caused Schumer to raise his voice and say, "Don't you insult us, fellow Democrats. Don't say that." Gutierrez turned around and said, "Don't raise your voice at me. This is what I've said to other Democrats. I'm merely conveying it to you here to your face." Ultimately, they all took a group photo. There was a bit of a kumbaya moment, and they realized that the fight now shifts to January 19th. But members of the Hispanic Caucus said to Schumer, "We're going to go home over the Christmas holidays, and we're going to hear it from our constituents in these predominantly Latino and immigrant districts across the country who were expecting us to come home with a deal. We don't have it, and that could suppress turnout and support for Democrats going into a critical midterm election year."
Wow, quite the confrontation. Ed, you mentioned disaster relief.
Yeah.
Where exactly do things stand on that in the Senate? Because as you know, there are people who are waiting on that money. Every day that goes by really is another difficult day as they try to wait for whatever relief might be on its way.
So the House this afternoon did pass an $81 billion plan that would provide money to Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Florida, California, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. It got out of the House pretty overwhelmingly, but there are too many lingering concerns in the Senate that they simply are running out of time and decided we're just going to have to wait on this until early January. Among other things that they're worried about is Puerto Rico getting enough money? The island has been pushing for a robust aid package. This plan, while generous, doesn't give as much as the island wants. Plus, supporters of the island and its policies, because remember they have no voting member in Congress, noticed that there are a few issues in the tax bill that was passed that could adversely affect Puerto Ricans. Among other things, companies on the island are still going to be taxed as if they're foreign companies, despite the fact that they're in a U.S. territory. Plus, that child tax credit, the $2,000 child tax credit that applies to everyone else in the United States, they forgot to apply it to Puerto Rico.
Wow.
And the reason is because Puerto Ricans don't pay federal income tax. They only pay the payroll tax. But Democrats and Republicans agree they deserve to pay it as well. So it looks as if they may try to use the disaster bill in January to make those fixes in the tax bill, plus get all the money out to those states. But you're right. Millions of people across the country affected by these storms are going to have to wait a little while longer. Another example of Congress not getting its job done this year.
Right. And on that note, Ed O'Keefe in Washington for us. Ed, thank you.
Take care, Elaine.